When we made this movie, no one had made a movie like The Mask.
Hello!
From the story to the characters, excitement in the color.
Huddle! Gangsters, romance, musical numbers.
Wolf whistling at the girl and the eyes bulging out.
How could you not have fun?
Such a wild character.
He's the guy that everybody would love to be when, somebody's going, "You got a problem, man?"
No one had ever done these sort of effects.
It's so explosive. And it's so funny.
Pardon me?
Where anything can happen.
It originated as a comic book, and it was by Dark Horse. The comic book, though, was radically different than what the film turned out to be.
Well, the comic book initially was a concept I had years before I started the comic itself. The comic was very dark, a lot of humor.
And it was edgy and a kind of extreme, cool style to it that I thought was really attractive. But it was quite frightening. The character would put the mask on and chop people up and then have a joke or two. And there's a large body count.
It was vindication. It was revenge. There was that "screw you, boss, I'm coming back at you" attitude that the Mask had. But of course, we were familiar with that and had embraced it with Freddy Krueger.
Mike DeLuca fell in love with it. He was the guy who really pushed this project forward.
They were primarily interested in making a horror film with probably a sense of humor to it.
They wanted to be true to the comic, and the original comic was very much in line with what New Line had made in the past.
Come to Freddy.
They really were looking for a fresh Elm Street series, basically. I was literally thinking about looking into the rights very shortly myself, and I got a call from New Line.
Well, I always thought Chuck would be a great director for this project. He also done one of our most successful Nightmare on Elm Streets that Chuck and Frank Darabont had written the script for, and then Chuck directed.
Have a seat.
Ultimately, it was more successful financially than the first two put together. So there was a trust that was developed between Bob Shaye and myself, and that I'd taken his prized franchise and given it a new life.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV.
Chuck had the right sensibility for Mask because he understood effects at that point. He had a strong base in horror, which is where this project started out.
And I think the first more horrific script let them down a little bit.
There were several different writers and several different drafts, but none of them really caught that synthesis of playful nastiness and comeuppance, so to speak.
Originally, when I looked at the material, I really kept getting stuck because as they were horrific, that this was such a fun idea that a really scary take on The Mask seemed to be a letdown to me. And I slowly realized that this would be a much better comedy and a very explosive comedy.
And he had a very exciting take, I thought.
Get right up here! Don't be shy!
It's rare in Hollywood that a studio really lets you turn an idea around and do something as original as The Mask. But they let me run with it.
Sorry, wrong pocket.
Chuck was the visionary for this film. And the more we talked, the more we realized how much in sync we were on this.
You know, I really knew what I wanted to do, and I realized a lot of it was influenced by Tex Avery.
He's known for being, I guess, the strangest animator who achieved popularity.
He was running the edge between comedy and kind of grotesque things that would surprise you almost to the point where they were a bit scary, but they were so inventive and brilliant.
His idea to sort of fuse those things into one film was really solid for me.
And Mike and I sat at my house and worked things out on a scene-by-scene basis, and he went and wrote our draft of the screenplay. What I realized right away with the basic story of The Mask, while it's a fun movie, I take the themes very seriously. You know, what is that animal inside each person? I think that kind of idea makes us each ask, you know, what's inside of me? What would be unleashed? What's the darker or crazier side? This is a terrifically resonant theme that's been in storytelling forever. My first knowledge of it was Jekyll and Hyde. That's the classic tale. It's a prevalent story because it's true. There's a side to human nature we can't quite explain. That dark side or that uncontrollable side.
With these powers, I could be
A superhero!
Most people, their public persona is very different from who they really think they are in their hearts.
P-A-R-T. Why? Because I gotta!
And the really great comedic version of this that had been done previously was The Nutty Professor. And in our case, I thought it was taking the idea a step further in this kind of surreal world.
Hello, chérie. We met again.
I made sure there was an internal logic in the story. While all the rules of the mask aren't clear, in fact, it's kind of fun for the audience to discover them, we had to know, and I had to know, exactly what I felt it could and could not do.
How does it work?
I don't know.
Whatever you were truly deep down inside, you would become that when you put on the mask.
Somebody stop me!
It changes you into the alter ego, you know, to the suppressed side of your personality. It blows that side up like 1,000 times. And, all right, bring it in.
In the case of Stanley Imkis, Stanley's worst side is a joyful prankster. He's ultimately such a good-hearted guy, it's a fun rampage.
Tell Scarlett I do give a damn.
He becomes this love-crazed, wild, Fred Astaire character that's just unstoppable.
He becomes everything he isn't, but everything he wants to be.
That's gotta hurt.
The third thing, taking my cue from vampire movies, I imposed a rule that the mask would only work at night. Very early on in the process, Chuck told me to write this film for someone named Jim Carrey, and I remember quite distinctly saying, "Who?"
Me? Oh, I'm great.
Really good.
At that time, Jim was not well known. Like a lot of people, I first noticed Jim Carrey on the TV show In Living Color, and I just thought it was the funniest human being on the planet. I'd never seen anything like it. Stanley Ipkiss is so much based on Jim Carrey. I mean, this was really redeveloped for Jim because I just had a hunch. I was convinced he'd be a terrific lead, and I went on this little kind of Jim Carrey quest.
And I'm pretty sure Chuck said, "Well, I'm not making the movie unless we can get him to star in it."
When I saw the stand-up show that Jim Carrey had done, I mean, I was floored. I thought this guy was fantastic, and he was absolutely perfect for the mask.
When I met him, I said to him, "If you trust me, we'll do a much more subtle kind of romantic comedy. And then when you put the mask on, we'll push the envelope on what you've done on the wilder side." And those were both so true to Jim. So that sweet, soft-spoken Jim Carrey exists, and the edgy, crazy Jim Carrey exists, just facets of the same true human being.
You were good, kid, real good. But as long as I'm around, you'll always be second best, see?
When he read the screenplay in our first meeting, after he read that, he said, "It's like it's written for me." And I said, "You know, it is. It has been written for you. I hope you say yes, because I'm in trouble if you don't." New Line was okay with Jim Carrey, but Jim Carrey at that time was not a coup. He was a bit of a risk.
This is a moment of truth. When a man shows what he's really made of. Crap.
Ace Ventura had not come out, so no one really knew how popular Jim would be. The reason why we hired Jim was that we needed someone who could handle the physicality of the role, and Jim was always the obvious choice.
The more problematic concern, which was who was going to play the love interest.
That was the hardest and toughest casting.
But I always envisioned her as some incredibly voluptuous girl.
I conceived of this kind of Marilyn Monroe entrance for this girl. So right from the top, I wanted her to be a real femme fatale.
They went out to many big actresses, but you were really saying, do you want to star in a movie with a TV actor, with a director who had done a horror movie? And everyone turned us down.
Thanks.
Because this was a low-budget film. We weren't going to get the leading ladies of the day. So I felt I'd be much better off with somebody brand new. At one point in the casting, we did take Anna Nicole Smith very seriously. And this was at the very beginning of her career when she looked her best and she was the sharpest.
She really looked what I thought the part called for. And then we actually talked about the possibility of an African-American actress.
Chuck went very hard after Vanessa Williams.
And we were getting closer to shooting, so it was getting a little tense. And we opened it up to wide calls, and we just had a lot of 8x10s sitting around.
He would not cast that part until he found the right person, and then he did.
Right away in her look, even in her 8x10, there was something especially charming and unusual about this girl. And it seemed to go with this whole kind of 40s Edge City thing. Cameron Diaz was immediately the choice I was most excited about. I knew I was in trouble because she had no acting background at that point.
Tina Carlisle, pleased to meet you.
The pleasure's all mine.
At the end of the day, Chuck, just as he did with Jim Carrey, who it was not a household name, he chose Cameron because he thought that she and Jim were perfect counterpoint.
The chemistry between her and Jim, when I read them together, was just terrific. They were my leads.
I guess I'll get going.
Yeah, but Miss Danny Ray, just stay for a second, you know?
I literally put my job on the line, and I said, this is our star. You're going to thank me for this later. This is somebody special.
Chuck is an experienced producer, and so he's no dummy about what's required for a production, and so I trusted him.
And this was a huge gamble. This was the largest budgeted film New Line had ever made. This was their first film that was really kind of a mainstream sort of film with big visual effects. And we really went to ILM because we needed something recognizable on the marquee that would say that this is a legitimate mainstream sort of movie. We were going to use technology that had to be developed, but what New Line has always been great at is taking risks and taking gambles.
Oh, every movie is a risk. It's a question of what gets your blood rushing and gets your temperature up, and this picture definitely did.
Hey, Mark. All right, pay attention and follow him with your gun. Playback.
Jim! All right, let's see playback real quick.
While every film is tough and the hours are long, and I don't think people have any idea, still within that space, I've got to make sure that we enjoy ourselves, or I don't believe the audiences will in this kind of movie.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
I think in comedy, one of the director's jobs is to create kind of a bubble around the set where we can literally be playful.
Chuck was very supportive of Jim. He was very much giving Jim a lot of freedom and then stepping in where he felt he needed to. But he was very good on allowing Jim to really be Jim and really express himself.
I knew Jim would be great with improvisation, so I wanted to make sure I left room for that. That ability to fly with a good idea was something I wanted to build in.
That's all right. There you go, son. Now get out of here. You're bothering me.
That was Jim's strength, and that's really where a lot of the great magic came from.
The best single improvisation Jim did on the show was because a special effect broke down. There's this scene where he becomes a Frenchman.
Kiss me, my dear, and I will reveal my croissant.
And he was meant to do this crazy gag with lighting cigarettes. The property people had this big thing of cigarettes that Jim was supposed to light and inhale, and they would instantly be sucked down to ash.
Cigarette?
And it didn't really work at all. And Jim said to me, what if and it's one of the funnier, more natural bits in the film. So Jim actually did improvise one of the opticals.
Like Napoleon, I will divide and conquer.
I don't think anybody else could have done this. I mean, there's something that is so unique about his personality, his physical abilities, and his talent.
What he did physically on The Mask is very, very strenuous and takes somebody special. He would throw himself into it, body and soul.
One thing about him is his energy. We worked long hours on The Mask. You know, when you get to about the 12th hour, everybody gets tired. And we used to have this expression where we say we were hitting the wall. And I'll be damned, Jim would just then easily kick his energy level up 2 or 3 more notches and just keep the whole crew going.
Then Cameron came on, and wow, whoever thought that, I think she was 19 at the time, that she could keep up with Jim Carrey, and boy, did she.
Her first day of dialogue, I think we were both just a little concerned. But we got the scene, I looked at the dailies, and she was wonderful. Right away, you can see we'd made a great choice.
And when he snaps, I want it to be like a kiss like you've never had before. Okay. I want you to be dazed. Okay?
But really, she was the girl you see. She is that fun. Cameron will tell you she had a great time on the set, even though she had this responsibility, and she eventually, relaxed with that. One of the things that was really a leap from the original comic book was Milo the dog.
My friends have a Jack Russell Terrier named Milo, who's crazy.
I ain't gonna throw it with you attached to it. Oh!
It just was a big epiphany. That's it. Stanley has a Jack Russell Terrier named Milo, who's his best friend.
You stay here and be a good boy. Daddy's gonna have to go kick some ass.
It was casting I took as serious as my other lead performers. I had auditions, which the producers thought were crazy.
A dog does go through an audition just the same way that an actor does. A lot of times you go in, meet the director, but each project is different. We happened to have a Jack Russell at that time, so it just worked.
Smart dog.
The dog was really one of the strengths of this movie. So we made sure we shot this dog correctly. We took the time. He always hit his mark, and he always came through.
Go get him. That's it. Yeah.
One of Max's best moments in the film is probably the keys gags in the jail.
The cheese, the keys.
That was a really neat sequence, and you look for little pieces that really make things work.
Particularly this one moment I love where you just see the dog kind of checking to make sure the cop is still sleeping. That is a very human moment for a dog.
We had the guard stir just a little bit, and he froze. And if you look closely there, his eyes look up at him, and then as he settles back down, he goes back down, grabs the keys, and takes off. That particular sequence, we shot that first, and then Jim Carrey came in, watched the sequence, and responded to it.
Put the keys down and get the keys. Go on, over there.
Max and Jim were both wonderful at improv. The one I like the best is where Jim is at the window of the jail.
Get up here. Get up here. That's it.
The dog kept jumping and jumping, and Jim kept in character responding to him. I just kept the cameras rolling.
Put some effort into it.
The other one is when Jim has the Frisbee and Max is hanging on to it.
No, no, no. Stop it.
Max just hung on. It was very, very funny.
Ipkiss, get your dog away from me. I'm sorry, he seems to be attracted to you.
In the comic book, you don't really have a sense of place. And I had this concept for a place called Edge City, which is a little based on our world, of course, but it in kind of a time that seems to be somewhere between the 40s and 60s and the present, sort of all mixed up, in a world that would be a little funnier, a little crazier. And that to me is Edge City.
The methane emissions really pick up the colors.
The look of this movie was very interesting. There are two key players in it. One was our production designer, Craig Stearns, and the other was the cameraman, John Leonetti. And we wanted to give it an exciting, interesting look that would be comic booky, but also look realistic.
I wanted it to be bigger than life and richer than life and more colorful than life. So I thought it was a great opportunity to really have these rich, magical colors throughout the film, especially with this green, vibrant face.
The expression of the story visually in comic books is very much with color. And I thought that it would be really fun to be able to push the limits of colors in this film and make it a live-action, vivid comic.
A French poodle. Sorry, son, the dog was rabid, had to put it down.
But making it believable that Edge City exists was kind of the challenge to me. In the day, it's kind of a dreary, kind of gnarly city, if you will. But Edge City at night really comes alive.
We created the nightclub, and we really wanted to create a feel of a place that would be fun, that would look different, but also have retro feel.
Let's rock this joint!
The dance scenes were quite amazing. It really had to be choreographed, but yet we allowed for a lot of improvisation at the same time.
Fortunately, we were able to get the rehearsal time, and we worked up those dances almost like improv comedy, where we found out what both kids were capable of doing, and I worked out exactly where it was going to go into optical, because I wanted to do something that was wild and different there, too. It was just a hard time explaining that to New Line.
Hit it!
I had some reservations about the big dance number, which Chuck was adamant about. He just insisted on it, and I thought it was gonna be over the top. But of course, I didn't know what a superstar Jim really was.
Smoking!
Jim was able to do a lot of things that we never thought he could do, which saved us on computer graphics. The most tricky thing about visual effects at that point was interactivity, was where the people really interact with the visual effects. And that's what this movie was about.
A Tommy gun!
I remember at the time Chuck saying, well, the effects are going to be very expensive for this film, but we're going to save a lot of money with Jim because Jim can stretch his face, and so ILM has a little less work to do.
He is a rubber man. There's nobody that's more rubbery naturally, I think, than him, and what a perfect match for The Mask.
I was looking at what this guy was doing with his body, and I'd just never seen anything like it. And I knew with Jim, he'd meet me halfway with what he could do in a performance. And that blend is, I think, a big part of what makes the visuals in The Mask successful. So in fact, we actually scrapped some shots when we were shooting them because Jim already looked like he was stretching. There was no reason to help it along with an optical effect.
The beauty of these effects in this movie is that they didn't overpower Jim.
You can't put the optical on top of the actor. The actor and the optical have to really be working together. One of the things that I think is unheralded a little bit from The Mask is the job Greg Canham did on the makeup. One of the things that I knew was going to be really tough was how to make this makeup effect so versatile that the performance could come through and maybe even be enhanced by it. Because I was going to take a performer whose best asset was this extremely mobile face.
This guy's incorrigible.
I covered him completely in rubber, which could be a disaster.
We could have done it much cheaper with just like a green rubber mask, but then you would never get Jim coming through.
The mask work was done off of Jim's bony structures, so cheekbone, forehead, chin, and everything else was such a thin prosthetic that you got every expression and eyebrow movement and everything that Jim Carrey normally does. And I thought it worked great, blended right in with the opticals.
When we made this movie, no one had done the type of effects that you see in The Mask.
We were just getting into the digital phase where CG had become a legitimate tool.
The state of special effects way back in '94. Really, it was close to the dawn of the digital age of computer animation as we know it today.
And really, we were entering new territory. So that's why we went to a company like ILM.
They were the groundbreaking house. They still are terrific.
They had done the Star Wars, the Indiana Jones movies.
They were just superstars.
Visual effects over the years have evolved so much.
And I think it showed the world that visual effects blending with live action was going to be a lot easier to pull off. And creatively, just a better tool.
People didn't ask about the opticals specifically until later. I think they sort of accepted the opticals as part of the film. And that was my goal. And my goal is not to let the opticals run away with the story, but to make them part of the story.
The original ending of the film, Charlie jumps into the river and gets the mask, and it just didn't test well. I mean, nobody cared. They wanted the dog to have the mask, and so we had to reshoot that scene.
Marlo! We brought the film in a not complete state to Cannes, and after the screening, the audience was ecstatic. They really went crazy.
They knew they had a terrific film. We also had Ace Ventura open a few months before us, which had done well. It was a great ad campaign.
I remember when the movie was about to come out, that trailer was playing everywhere and people really were responding to it.
Jim Carrey is...
That's the guy! Hello!
The Mask.
When the film was finally released, there was such an explosive reaction because no one had any expectations. No one knew what to think of this film called The Mask.
Hold on to your lug nuts! It's time for an overhaul!
People, I think, were blown away. I just think people had a really good time.
So, you know, I was quite happy with the reception of the film, and it made an amazing amount of money for a small film.
For New Line, The Mask was one of its most successful films when it came out. It had a giant opening weekend, and it became an instant success.
And Jim was really acknowledged and deserved it.
You love me. You really love me.
Well, I think it played a signal role in his career, but if it wasn't The Mask, it would have been something else because the guy is such a signal talent.
After The Mask, Jim went into Dumb and Dumber, and it's hysterical. I mean, that's another side of Jim.
I guess they're right. Senior citizens, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, can still serve a purpose.
I think they took that kind of charming simpleton and really made it work in that film.
Austria! Well then,
Good day, mate.
Cameron got so much attention as a brand new leading lady. I think she did something very wise. Rather than go out and do a lot of big commercial films, she did some really interesting films. And I think showed people right away that she's versatile, and I think that now she has this great prevalent career.
She has really demonstrated herself to be a very good actress with a very nice range. She became a superstar.
After the success of The Mask, we talked about sequels. I think there's more stories that can be told with The Mask.
The great thing about the comic and about the movie, anyone can get The Mask. So while Stanley Ipkiss's story may play out, someone else can get The Mask and start a whole different storyline.
Time will be good to The Mask. I still talk to people who tell me how much they love that movie and how they think it's a real classic.
I still believe in the story of The Mask. There was a lot of passion put into this little film, and I think it adds to the fun and excitement of the show. It's one of those good risks, I think, that you need to take sometimes in life.
Smoking!